welcome to our final event for day 2 here at Conference to Restore Humanity. We're here with Pam Moran and Ira Socol. The event is A Space for Everyone, Humane Learning Spaces Supporting Human Learners. So when William Alcott said in the 1830s that we too often consult our own convenience rather than the comfort, welfare, or accommodation of our children, he was defining a problem we seem so reluctant to solve, and that's the creation of humane learning spaces that enable all learners. So our hope today, I think, is to discuss how space impacts humans, particularly young humans, diverse humans, marginalized humans, looking at DIY solutions to existing spaces, as well as how to work with architects, designers, and school building departments. I'm so stoked to introduce Pam and Ira. Welcome.
Hey,
Hi.
Chris, Nick.
Well, Nick, I'll just say that when I first ran across that quote, when I was trying to write a dissertation in, I don't know, 2009, and realized that if anyone wants to read that Alcott's works, they're on Google Books, and they're amazing because he describes the classroom for everyone. And he does it in 1840. He says kids should not be sitting still for more than 5 minutes at a time. He says they should get outside every 20 minutes. He says the classroom should be filled with distractions. And it's proof of how much we continue to lose by people who pretend they're pushing something traditional, when actually the traditions that we cling to are the radical solutions. Anyway, I will share the screen, Pam, and we can start going.
Let's get on the roll. So we're thrilled to be here with everyone. We would love for those of you that either know us or don't know us or know other people in the chat, if you don't mind just putting in the chat who you are, where you're from, what you do, we would love to be able to take a look at that. I tend to monitor the chat. We are going to do some talk time with you. We'll have some chat sort of challenges for you as we go through today, but we're thrilled that you're here. And the very first thing that we're going to do is to start with a slide that we think really sets the challenge that we put in front of over 2,400 educators a few years ago. And that is, how do we really go after a sense of what we believe about young people? And how do your beliefs match the spaces that we create? And I will tell you that our definition of space is not just a three-dimensional wall-driven space, but it's really the concept of space as it's defined by experiences, by relationships, and by environment. So we are today going to really challenge you to really take a look at some of the images we're going to show you and reflect on those images. And we're going to get you to do some sharing around this. How do those images match your own reality and the reality of young people in your schools? And one of the questions that we have that we take out now from where we were years ago working together to really transform 26 schools in a school district with about 14,000 students, that one of our challenges that we still are putting out there is, how humane are the spaces in your school? So we want you to think about that for a moment and reflect on that. Hi, Skylar. It's good to see you. Thank you.
You know, a mark of this is when we asked kids in a very high poverty middle school that had lots of other issues, including the fact that a very small percentage of parents in this school had ever graduated from high school themselves. We asked them how they wanted to change their school, and they said they hated their cafeteria and wanted to change their dining experience, their terms, not ours. And their answer to that was to build two 16, 18-foot tall, 8-foot square rolling tree houses that could move around the room with rope swings and ladders, and actually a space for a wheelchair to get into at least the lower level, and It did indeed transform the school in every conceivable way. It transformed the student body, the perception of all the students by the teachers. It changed the relationship to the community as parents who had not been back in that school since they had left it at the end of 8th grade came in to see what kids were doing and help out at times. Entirely iterative design, entirely student generated and directed. Students eventually wrote the rules for it. You know, you don't climb up with either your lunch tray or your laptop. But it was a thing of turning space over to kids and allowing them to build humane spaces for themselves and giving them ownership of the school. Pam?
So Ira and I worked together for over 10 years in a public school setting. I ended my career in public schools as a superintendent, started out as a 7th grade science teacher. Hats off to you, Natasha. I see that you're in the room and are a middle school teacher. And I have great appreciation for everybody that comes to love and stays with middle school. It's, in my opinion, one of the coolest places to be in the public school setting is in a middle school. But one of the things that I had the opportunity to do as a young educator in the 1970s was to experience what it means to work in a school that was open space, where there were no textbooks, where we built our learning around Bloom's taxonomy, and we focused on a mastery model. That created a vision for me of what was possible with kids who came from all kinds of backgrounds, mostly economically disadvantaged, and helped to really shape, I think, my lifelong mission to create spaces for learning where everybody can fit everywhere. Ira, I'm going to kick it to you to just talk a little bit about what your early experience that sort of created vision for you. And what we have up is what we do now, is that we do this work with schools, school divisions, teachers all over the country, and even states.
Well, for me, the as a kid who hated every minute of school, usually didn't attend, and when I did, I was usually in trouble. But had my life saved by a school without walls alternative school in high school, that had no rules and no attendance requirements and no particular way you had to earn credits. You just had to earn New York State high school credits one way or another. And but the basic humanity of that allowed every kid to find their own way to success taught me that even with the most troubled group of kids you could imagine, you could succeed by undoing what everybody thinks kids need. Um,
That I think the other thing that's really important is that school, one of the founders was Neil Postman, right?
Yes, it's true. Right after he and Charlie Weingartner had written Teaching is Subversive Responsibility, Subversive. Um, and I mean, the trick there is that it really took the most vulnerable learners in a very large urban school system and made them successful. And that model was replicated in Philadelphia and lots of other places. So it's something we've that's been proven, and it's something that's guided me ever since. So
Here's what we're
that,
going to be talking about today.
yep. I mean, I think there are a couple of things we want to get out and talk about. Universal design for learning, which is a concept that, you know, brings all of those spatial and temporal and everything else concepts into place, and neuroqueer spaces, spaces that can be comfortable for everyone. One of the things I think schools traditionally have been worst at is understanding semiotics of learning spaces, all the messages they are sending all the time and to who. Uh, Understand that when we create spaces, we're privileging certain people, and we're unprivileging others. And how does space teach? all the time, because what we'll say is that, and I've been saying this for a long time, but everything students see, hear, feel, taste, and experience teaches something. And most of what is taught is unintentionally really unfortunate. Um, Kids don't learn much from the things we say to them, but they learn a lot from what we do. And our teachers, our spaces teach an awful lot. And I think every educator has to consider what their space tells students. Because I think when we think about semiotics as a general rule, we we have to think of all the forms, all the ways humans send signals out. And Pam asked me about the gestural thing, but I think teachers are incredibly attuned to this. They complain about kids eye rolling and shrugging their shoulders and all the things kids do, and they pay very, very little attention to all the messages their gestures send. But it's not just linguistics, and it's not just visual signage. It's everything that goes on. And that has to play against, the whole notion of neurodiversity. And here we go to Ryan and stimpunks, which I probably do not go a day without advocating that people go there and spend their time there. Um, like humanity needs biodiversity on this planet, it needs neurodiversity among its people. And we have to stop privileging one form of supposed normal, because there is no normal. And we have to celebrate the fact that a lot of people come at things with a lot of different perceptual things, and that's all a very good thing for all of us. And I know that I fall onto a number of these spots. Many of us do. And we've often been made to feel terrible about that by the schools we go to. So Pam and I talk a lot about, and we think this is important in terms of space, of what we call the 4 A's, that what students need from us is acceptance, access, attention, and abundance. Um, and and when we're creating the user experience of students in school, the learner experience, and thus developing our user interface, our learner interface that we have, and we're thinking about universal design and empathy, our spaces have to be places that accept every child. They have to provide access to all the opportunities we have. We have to give kids more of our attention than we demand from them. It's students, learners that have to be heard. And we have to give them whatever abundance we can. And I always say abundance is not a question of things necessarily. Abundance is time, and it's giving kids 50 different chances, and it's giving kids our focus and giving them the support they need when we have it. It's mostly things that don't cost us anything, but it can be. And in the fourth from the left picture there, we have a room that was once a librarian's office. The librarians gave it away. We found a table that we traded 2 chairs for, and the kids fixed it up. The kids painted one of the walls with blackboard paint, and they made it a kids-only conference room as a solution. We don't believe in taking phones away from kids. They're learning tools. We don't believe in limiting tools to shops and students taking shop.
That's actually an elementary young girl that's running that chop saw there.
Yes.
But Ira, I think probably one of my biggest challenges when I was superintendent and walking schools with you, and I found Ira on Twitter and encouraged him to leave Michigan and come to Virginia to join us in the work we were doing. And all of a sudden I realized the influence that he was happening. If you look at that round table there, Ira, talk about that a little bit. I remember walking in there that day and thinking, oh my gosh, how far am I going to get pushed before my urge to control says enough's enough?
Well, this all began with a 3rd grade teacher saying you didn't have enough whiteboard space. And I looked down at the floor and said, that looks pretty white to me. You know, why can't kids be drawing and writing on that? And then we discovered they could draw and write on anything. We didn't have to buy whiteboard tables. We could draw on anything, and at worst, the magic eraser took it off. And once we said that, then kids' inventiveness just took off, you know, in this huge way. And one of the things we discovered as kids started writing everywhere is that, to quote one elementary school principal, it redefined graffiti for her as shared learning. As kids started writing on every window, on every floor, on every surface. And it's just the thing of saying, what do we have here and how can we use it differently? So our next thing is we're going to ask you to sort of react to this and in the chat if you can. But if you want to raise your hand, then Pam will notice you.
I may notice you. If not, we'll get Nick and Chris to help us out. But one of the
we
things
used to say that this was our mantra in our schools. Every student should be allowed to choose where, how, or if to sit. And if those of you who watch the community, you know, the lab school thing from Charlottesville yesterday, much of the design we poured into that building was influenced by this theory. And so how do you feel, and how do we get to people understanding this?
Yeah. So we want you to think about every time that over the years that I would start to talk with kids and I would go, what do you actually do in school? Kids would say, we spend a lot of time sitting around, sitting down, sitting and doing work. The word sit seemed to be a real defining word for what schools are. And so Ira really brought this concept of how do we really get out of thinking about sitting as something that kids do in order to do mostly silent work or listening work in schools, and really start to light up kids differently with this kind of a statement of how do we give kids these opportunities? So I'm wondering if anybody wants to jump in and maybe let us think about with you, how do you think we get there? How do you see getting there? And why would we want to do this? Why would we want to give kids the most simple of choices beyond being able to go to the bathroom when they need to? Of giving kids a lot of opportunities to orient in space differently than the way that we typically set them up. What do you think?
You know, I will say that one of the things that happened when we made this one of our first big statements was that it taught teachers that they could trust kids in a different way. Lots of teachers said kids will fight over the couches, they'll fight over this, they won't do this, they won't do that. In fact, the kids just became more comfortable and discipline problems virtually disappeared. And that allowed us to push some other context in.
Mal says sit's a really defining word for training dogs. So Mal, jump in on this. What do you really see as is there a pathway to have teachers really think about their belief systems and control needs in terms of seating in order to be able to really start to free people from feeling that they need to do this? And I will tell you that one of the most enlightening statements we ever had was we were at a conference doing a presentation, and a teacher texted us the next day or actually emailed us and said, I went back, and this was a fourth grade teacher, and I said to a student in my class who had been really struggling to stay in his seat, always falling out of his chair, oftentimes ending up in the principal's office, or I would put him out in the hall. Gosh, you know, you think that ought to be something that's been disappeared. But she said, I gave him the chance to stand up versus sit while he was doing his work. She said it was the first day this year that I did not have discipline issues with that student. So how do we get there?
Is that directed at Mal in particular?
No,
or Mal
anyone.
or anybody.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I was just going to add, I had put in here too, and this is sort of something that we're working on with our team of teachers in Michigan, who many of whom are in attendance in the conference this week. And it's just kind of about having resources in space, but also then just, I think, defining how to use that space intentionally, deliberately, purposefully, to kind of give transitions, to give spaces in the room, to give some flexible seating options, like some kind of purpose and intention. So that way you're not, I don't know, at cross purposes with all of these different ways of knowing and being. If we can have sort of some quiet spaces for individual kind of quiet learning, some more boisterous spaces for collaborative learning, obviously then some tech space, some maker tools and those things. So that way we're not trying to do all the things all at once, all in the same space, which to me then kind of excludes, people who need quieter environments in which to focus or to diminish their own anxiety and things. So I don't know. I kind of am a mind of in that regard.
Well,
I agree. Chris, one of the things that I think about is that, we have so conditioned teachers to see seating and sitting, both seating and sitting, as being classroom management tools, that if kids are sitting in rows, if they're not moving, if we have a demand that they stay seated, that somehow that gives us a locus of control over the behavior in the classrooms. What we have found is that the more that we saw teachers build out lots of opportunities for kids in terms of seating, the less discipline issues that they had in their classrooms. It was almost the opposite of what people believe will happen.
I'll also just add in, because it goes to the choice and the current controversy, that, I always say about phones, because I've been begging people in education, and I have evidence of this since 2004, to teach with phones in the classrooms. So schools have refused to help kids learn how to effectively and efficiently use phones in their lives, and instead have spent all their time complaining that kids don't know it. So we've abdicated all our responsibility, and now we complain about it. And Susan, I understand. I had to, what I used to say to my students in Michigan State was, just have your phone on your desk so we're not listening to your ringtone if there's a call. And if you have to take the call, it's not my decision, it's yours. How do you get out of the room comfortably, and without bothering people? If we don't actively do these things, and one of the things that Pam and I have seen in businesses is, we had a manager at Steelcase in Michigan tell us that the reason first year hires failed was that they couldn't figure out how to work there. They couldn't choose where to sit. They couldn't switch from heads up to heads down work. They couldn't make themselves comfortable. It's classic thing. So we don't want to teach it, but we want to complain about it. And that's the thing. Pam, I'm going to just flick through some images here. Well, if you want to include this, Ryan
Yes.
knows this because he
Yep.
asked me to write this, and I don't know if we want to spend the time. I did do an AI version of my voice
Ira,
reading this.
just play a little bit of it for my benefit, since I ask you to spend money and make your voice be able to read. And when earlier I modeled for Donna what it might sound like if you were reading it in dyslexic Ira voice,
Yeah,
she said, no, that can't be. And I said, can be.
yeah, but it's so, just as the spaces we tried to create. This is a high school mechatronics lab, that actually we removed the wall to the hallways, so it was part of the hallway. And when the architect said, "Don't you think the noise will be distracting?" the principal said, "Noise attracts kids. That's good." You know, you can see kids of every age being in charge of how they occupy space. And that, that's an inherent part of it, because what I think we always worry about, or need to worry about, is what it is that traditional classrooms teach. And what they teach are not things, I think these are things we don't want to be teaching, but it's what we teach nevertheless all the time. And it's when we're teaching all these things, then we can't complain that kids are not independent thinkers and don't grow up. And one of the things, and this is a classroom, and I won't say where, but Pam and I visited last year. It's a middle school classroom, so we're back in there. And, it was, I have to say, I was sitting through a Bueller moment here. Anybody? But here's are all the things that this classroom's communicating. And we tell kids all the time that we're not interested in what they have to say, and we don't care about their comfort, and we don't care about aesthetics, and we don't care about their needs. But okay, we expect them to care about the things we say.
And I think that one of the things that was a real wake-up call for me, if you go back to that picture,
Yeah.
is when I had a high school sophomore, I oftentimes would go out as a superintendent and just gather kids together and say, hey, talk to me about what's going on here. What's working, what's not working for you, and what are we doing? What are we trying to work on in the system? And I had this one young man in a high school say to me, Ms. Moran, I really appreciate that you really value. So you want everybody that graduates from high school to be able to collaborate well with others, to be able to work well, team with others, do project work. He said, but if I'm sitting in a class where most of my day is spent staring at the back of other people's heads, this was in 2010, about the time Ira came to the system. He said, I'm not going to be getting very many opportunities to learn how to collaborate with others. That was a real wake-up call for me, that despite the fact that we had been working on some pretty innovative practices in the system, it wasn't making its way systemically through the system. And that was my goal, is how do we make sure that no matter where a student lands, that they're going to get the very best that we have to offer, and that it's not going to depend upon the teacher or the classroom or the school as to whether you got those really great experiences and environments and spaces. So Ira, I'll kick it back to you.
So that was a middle school English classroom. This is a middle school English classroom.
This is an after.
Well, different school system.
Yeah.
And I will say that this classroom generated some of the greatest writing and stuff I've seen. And so it was, and we're of course running long, but when you see something like that, and when you look into any classroom, I encourage you to see, this is the same middle school. They're sort of open hallway spaces. What signals are being sent with each thing? When you think about semiotics, this is, and I'll play some of this, this is a collaboration between what's called Center One in Albemarle County, what used to be called Albemarle Tech, which is a different alternative high school. One based on pure project-based, passion-based learning. And they collaborated with an IEP group at an elementary school on a project. And this shows both the spaces and sort of the work together. Because we're not against animals.
These kids are working on a multi-age project around birds. And the elementary kids are trying to develop a natural area at their school that will be attractive to birds. And the high school students are working with them on all kinds of ways that they can build that out and design that out. I think these are bird houses being built.
Yeah. This is a middle school algebra class, right, Pam? And as Pam says, going low is as important as getting high. It was the math teacher who said, I need these low tables. It's what kids really want. She left one traditional desk in her classroom after we refurnished it, and when I went in next, kids were standing on top of it. So I thought, well, there you go. There's a use. This is in one of our more extreme examples, but after spending a bunch of time in Irish primary schools, um, we worked on creating this space and eventually moved a whole bunch of elementary schools to this multi-age learning environment. That did change so much for so many kids. It was extraordinary. It almost eliminated the need for pull-out special ed. They didn't have discipline issues. The kids were just delighted. And of course, the principal came to me 2 months later and said, you better start tearing down all the rest of the walls in the school.
And Ira, I would love to stop for a minute. And that question about what's getting signaled in a lot of the imagery as well as the videos that you're seeing, I would invite everybody that if you want to just put a word or two or three or four into the chat, there's a lot of really interesting comments going into the chat. Or if anybody would like to come off mute and focus a little bit on what do you see as getting signaled in terms of what the belief systems are, and the work that's important for kids to be able to do. What's really kind of jumping out at you from these images that you've seen? Yes, Mason has hand up. Jump in there, Mason.
I think one idea that jumps out to me with the left versus the right that's kind of become popular online recently is the idea of liminal spaces. Whereas there's spaces that you are like, it's like an airport terminal or like an aisle in the grocery store. There's spaces you're meant to pass through but not stay in. And so like the contrast between the left and the right image is that the left feels much more liminal. You transit through it but aren't meant to be there, in contrast to the right one, where it's clearly a space that has places for people intended to like sit and work and think.
Yeah. Let me tell you about the one on the left, or Ira, you jump in and do that.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. It was a custodian came to me and said, you know, there's money in the budget for renovating lockers in our schools, and no kids use lockers anymore. You know, they said out of 4,500 high school kids, we had 33 asking for lockers. So the custodians themselves, the building services department, ripped out the lockers and put in charging benches and charging counters places. One of our high school principals, I think of the school you're seeing here, said, let's get kids out of the classrooms. He said, can you put up like whiteboards and stuff up there? So we did. He got to a point where one of our assistant superintendents said at a leadership meeting, he said, I'd love to see some of the great stuff I see going on in the hallways happening in classrooms. Could we see that? One of the things about the liminal spaces, though, is it allows a different kind of collaborative thing, because different kinds of people connect in those spaces than connect in individual classrooms. So,
Yeah.
um,
You know, we that's a really great point, Skylar, about there are places where kids really need to be able to store outdoor gear. We've seen some schools out in the some of the colder areas of the Midwest that actually set up almost communal spaces for storing outdoor gear, and use lockers to do that. It's kind of an interesting concept. But one of the things that we really think about, also the comment about the capability for kids to reconfigure spaces, that as we were building out spaces, whether it was DIY, teachers that were DIYing it, or things where we were actually spending some money to say, okay, let's look at some different forms of furniture when we had a chance to do that, we were always looking at it through that idea of kids' relationships with furniture, kids' relationships with each other, kids' relationships with the teacher, and how do we give as much of that control, that locus of control, to kids being able to own their space. So we'd love to maybe, I think, Ira, you've got a question that's coming up here about that. And that is, how do you get to this where kids really have personal control over their space? I love a book that Stephen Levy wrote years and years and years ago, and he came and worked with our staff one year, that's called Starting from Scratch, where he tells the story about how he had his kids literally build almost all of the furniture that was in the classroom one year when he was teaching 5th grade. So I'm wondering, anybody want to jump in on this one? What's the challenge with this? And where do you see this happening in your schools, or in that sort of humane learning environments that we all, I think, aspire to, that are here with Chris and Nick for this conference? Oh, I love that, Monique. Can we start what are learning classrooms? What do they look like? What does a learning classroom look like? What is a humane? So
let's do it.
yeah.
I'll start the thread right now. And then as soon as we get done with this, anyone with any kind of interest can jump over there and do it. On that note, I will just comment that, you know, this spring, the HRP team has been doing a ton of school tours just to kind of get a sense of, right, well, how are the different ways that we can compose learning spaces. And it's been so cool to see all of the different ways that, you know, you can do learning even within the bounds of traditional school, right? You don't have to have a made fit to purpose specialty kind of thing. Catherine Patton in the chat here too mentioned Facebook Marketplace has got free, or you know, basically free furniture. You can kind of start to build your flexible seating arrangement there with some more homey type of things. And really, one cool thing that we had noticed for these classes is the vibes are immaculate, right? Like walking past or walking into them, you just get that like quiet calm, the cool engagement, right? You can feel the sense when you get into the room and then start talking to kids about what it is that they're doing or whatever else is going on. Or sometimes, right, a loud, boisterous space where kids are obviously engaged in the same kind of thing, moving fluidly around the room. So yeah, there's just so many ways to be engaged in learning spaces.
And you don't have to put a lot. I mean, we had teachers that literally, they either scavenged when UVA students would leave at the end of the school year, they'd go and scavenge. And as Ira said, if you let the furniture sit out a little while, it would be presentable to put
Stop
in the
smelling funny, right? Yeah.
Yeah, stop smelling funny. But one of the things that I also want to do is that somebody mentioned in the chat about kids can learn outdoors too. And I think that's maybe the next section that you have to pop through some images before we start.
Yes, and I want to get to two things. And one is outdoor images, because I think that's really important. And Pam and I, early in the pandemic, talked to a teacher in Detroit, so not a place with always good weather, but you know, she said, I don't ever want to go back inside the classroom. We're having such a good time outdoors every day that that's just where I want to stay, which is of course very Scandinavian in form. Anyway, just some outdoor images, you know, pulled from our schools. The kids on the left came and asked me to buy them 20,000 bees, so we did that. The kids on the right are doing a thing about you know,
Jamestown.
Jamestown and finding shelter. And so they built that. This was a project developed by a high school girl to teach middle school girls engineering by building out in the woods on walking trails.
They were making accessible spaces so that people in wheelchairs could go across small streams on a nature trail in Albemarle County.
This is one group of high school students who were not on a bell schedule at all, but on all, you know, completely transdisciplinary project. They were talking about slopes. And so here they are climbing mountains in the Appalachians. Even when we did a middle school gym, we made it merge with outside. And of course, the idea is kids can get wet and they can be out in the rain and they can be messy and all of that is okay. And so one of the things we want to push, and then I'll end with one quick thing, but is how do we get kids out of the building, which was, again, one of William Alcott's great questions. Get out. He said the garden of the school was more important than the school itself. And so, but we just want to say that it doesn't have to be expensive and it doesn't have to take a year and it sure doesn't need a strategic plan. And going back to Michigan a long time ago, I just want to share this little, I think it's a 2-minute video, but it's from an elementary school outside of Grand Rapids.
You talked to the teacher in the morning.
I went to the classroom in the morning and he said, my kids aren't happy here. They're not paying attention. What's going on? I did what I always do, which is film kids' feet, because that to me tells me whether they're bored to death or not. If they're tapping and bouncing and, you know, they're literally trying to walk out of the classroom. So what's great about this teacher is I talked to him about it briefly, and then I left to have lunch with the superintendent. And I got this text message from the teacher right after lunch that said, can you come back? And because I had just asked, what if your kids spent less time sitting? And just, this didn't cost a dime. This is what the room looked like in the afternoon. Some kids are still at their desks. Others are not. Suddenly choice has come to the room, and then I just kept checking in with him as things went along through the year. And he said the entire thing changed. You know, the kids' work changed, their happiness changed, their engagement with each other's changed. And you know, you can observe some of the neurodiversity happening in the room and seeing as kids get themselves comfortable. You know, his father worked at a paint store. He grabbed a lot of 5-gallon buckets, but he also built stuff. But it was all just kids making their own choices.
And that
So
happened in a day.
with that, Pam, you want to finish it up? Because we're a minute over, so I hate to do that.
I just want to say thank you to everybody that was here. Ira and I are always willing to consult. This is one of our favorite schools in Massachusetts, where the PE teacher built a climbing wall in the gym, and it changed the whole nature of the way kids approached physical education in that school. It's an amazing story, just as an aside. But anytime that you want to talk to us, reach out. We love to work with educators in every way possible to really open up what we call the contagious creativity that oftentimes is outsourced outside of our systems. And we believe that it is inherent in every school and every school district in the United States that teachers really do have a deep capability to do the R&D work that helps you build tree houses and opens the door to kids being able to do amazing work, building relationships, being experiential, and most importantly, being able to interact in their environment in a way that is very humane. So thank you for having us today. And Gareth, thank you. Jane, Susan, everybody that joined us today, we really appreciate you being here. And this conference is just wonderful. Chris, thank you, and Nick for putting this all together and giving us
a chance. Of course, thank you. I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, any time that we can spend with you both is a huge privilege. So thanks, y'all. This is our last live event for the night. Bring it back to the Discord. Mal, you got some work to do to start the thread that that I think Monique had come up with here. And we'll see you guys in the morning for Dr. Carla Shalaby's live Q&A. So can't wait for that. Thank you both so much again, and have a good night, everybody.
Thanks
Bye,
all.
Skylar. Bye, everybody. Great to see you.